Therefore it says, wake up, sleeper. Get up from the dead. Christ will shine on you. So be careful to live your life wisely, not foolishly. Take advantage of every opportunity because these are evil times. Because of this, don't be ignorant, but understand the Lord's will. Saints of God, my eyes have seen the glory and the coming of the Lord. He's trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. I see him in the watchfires of 100 circling camps. They have builded him an altar in the evening dew and damps. I can read his righteous sentence by the dim and flaring lamps. His day is marching on. Hello, welcome to Conversation with Faith Leaders. My name is Brandon A.J. Davis. I'm the founder of Content Writing Service and Conversation with Faith Leaders. And I'm delighted today to be able to have today's conversation with whom I think is one of the world's most renowned and foremost teachers and educators on race and racism in this country. She has, throughout the entirety of her teaching career, taught us and educated us on the fallacies of racism and helped us to understand that racism is really ignorance and we must get rid of that ignorance. And so after several months of emailing and begging and pleading, I have the pleasure of joining today in conversation with the incomparable Jane Elliott. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here, I think. And you may be happy for a minute, but that's going to end. I want you to know that.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. But you know what? It's always good to be challenged. And it's been a while since I've been in the classroom, so I'm ready. I have my pen, I have my paper, and I'm glad to be in the classroom with you today.
All right. And I'm glad to be at the head of it. I'm glad to be the one who's dispensing what I think is truth. If you hear me say something that you know isn't true, you need to stop me. But I try to stick to the truth because I honestly believe that ye shall know the truth and the truth shall set ye free. And if we learn the truth about race, we will free this whole nation and perhaps the world from the shackles of the ignorance of believing that there's more than one race of people on the face of the earth.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I'm not going to belabor the moment. I'm going to get right into the conversation because I want to respect your time. And again, thank you for making time for me today. The first question I want to ask, since 1968, the Blue Eyes, Brown Eye experiment, you have been actively educating people about race and racism. What motivated you to this effort?
The knowledge that we were living a lie. The knowledge that I went to UNI, University of Northern Iowa, to get my education and how to educate people. And I had been told throughout my K through 12 years that white people were superior. There are a number of races and the white race was the most excellent one. And I had believed that nonsense. And then I got to the University of Northern Iowa, which was at that time Iowa State Teachers College. And I realized that the students of color on campus were smarter than I was. They were everything that I wasn't, and they were nothing that they had been described to be. And I realized that I had been lied to, grossly lied to. And then after I married, my husband and I moved to Waterloo, Iowa, and he ran a National Tea grocery store in the north end of Waterloo, which was in the black section. And his customers, the vast majority of them were black. And once again, we learned that those black people did not live down to our expectations of them. It was absolutely remarkable. And that's when I decided, okay, this nonsense has to stop. We've been lied to long enough. And I'm not going to allow teachers to lie to my children. And then when I went back into the classroom, I refused to allow teachers to lie to the students who came to my classroom or who left my classroom and went into another classroom. I was attacking racism on every level, every chance I got.
Amazing, amazing. So when Dr. King was assassinated in 1968, you brought it upon yourself to teach your children about the brown eye, blue eye experiment. Can you tell me how that experiment was conducted?
Number one, it wasn't an experiment. It's against the law. It's illegal and unethical to experiment with people without their knowledge or without their permission. I put my children through an exercise in discrimination based on eye color, and I learned that exercise from Adolf Hitler. I was born in 1933, the year that Adolf Hitler and Franklin Roosevelt came to power in their respective countries. And when Adolf Hitler came to power, he immediately began to divide that country so that he could conquer that country, and that's what he did. He divided it on the basis of, number one, eye color. If you had a good German name, but you had brown eyes, they decided you must not be German, so you must not be a good citizen, you might not be fully human. So you were killed if you had brown eyes during the Nazi years. You need to realize that what I watched happen from the time I was born until 12 years later, when the Second World War was over, I watched people behave the way I have been watching people behave in this country for the last 4 years. For the last 4 years, we who have forgotten history have been reenacting it with Mr. Trump's policies in this country are the same that Adolf Hitler used in Germany and throughout Europe from 1933 until 1945. People need to be aware of this. I was aware that one of the ways they decided who went into the gas chamber during the Nazi years was eye color. And so after Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, I decided the next morning, that night, I decided that I was going to put my students through an exercise in discrimination so that they could realize what people of color go through in the United States of America all day, every day. And I decided to divide my students according to the color of their eyes because I learned that from Adolf Hitler. And so I went into my classroom the next morning. We discussed the killing of Martin Luther King Jr., who had been one of our heroes of the month in February, along with, unfortunately, George Washington, who owned slaves, Abraham Lincoln, who refused to free the slaves. And you need to know that Abraham Lincoln was a Melungeon. He was part white, part black, and part Cherokee Indian. We didn't teach that in the schools. We should have. We should have taught that fact because that's an important fact. Davy Crockett was one of our heroes of the month in February, and so was Daniel Boone. And all those men were about enslaving people or killing people because we wanted the land they were on. But they were our heroes of the month. And here Martin Luther King Jr. is killed. And I couldn't explain that to my students. So we talked about it that morning after they came to school. And then I said, look, do you kids have any idea how it would feel to be something other than white in this country? No. I said, would you like to know? Yeah. Would you like to do something that will help you to know that? Yeah. I said, okay, we could divide people. We could separate people according to differences and treat some of them the way we treat people of color in this country. Now, would you like to do that? Oh, yeah, they thought this would be fun. Most of what we did in my classroom was fun. They thought this would be fun. I didn't think it was going to be fun, but I didn't realize how ugly it was going to be because I could talk about racism, but I had never been on the receiving end of it until I did that exercise. And then all of a sudden, I realized exactly what's happening and exactly what we have to do about it. I was shocked at what my little brown-eyed students were willing to do to their blue-eyed peers the minute they became the people who had the right color eyes in that classroom. It was absolutely terrifying.
Wow, absolutely wow. You know, I'm excited because I'm learning as you are speaking. When I was a kid, I studied history and I fell in love with history. But as I became an older critical thinking adult, there were some things that I've read in books that began to shape my understanding of history. And when I was at Clinton High School, which is a predominantly white high school with a large African-American attendance and Native American attendance, we was favored by Mr. Larry Sutton, who is still today one of my favorite educators. Mr. Larry Sutton was the history teacher. He taught African-American history at a predominantly white high school, and it was an honors course. And so when I had excelled and passed all of my history courses, history classes rather, I was allowed to take his senior African-American history class as a sophomore. And I excelled in the class. But one of the things that I'm learning today from you is that there are still critical facts about the identity of persons that we've held in high regard that we did not know about. I think it's important to talk about the ethnic makeup of Abraham Lincoln. I did not know that he was part black. I knew that looking at some pictures, I saw some features, but I didn't know that he was part black or Indian.
You look at his face.
Native American.
Yeah, Native American. You look at the and when you say Native American, you're talking about Afro-Americans, because every human being, every landmass on the face of the earth, every landmass on the face of the earth was initially populated by people from Africa. Did you know that?
Yes, ma'am.
If you didn't know that, yeah. Well, you see, you need to get this. Everybody needs to read this magazine. They need to get this as soon as they can. Order this magazine from the National Geographic Society, April of 2018. See these two girls? These are twin girls. Their mother is what we call white, and the father is what we call black. Would you call these two girls biracial?
Yeah, well, ignorantly, yes, I would.
But that means that one of their parents must have come from outer space, because there's only one race of people on the face of the earth, and that's the human race. These girls are not biracial. They are not from two different races. Both their parents are members of the same race, the human race. We should be calling these two girls, what is the word? There's an art form, mosaic. We should call these two girls mosaic, because they are new, they are unique, they are beautiful, and they are made of many different elements. These girls are mosaics. They are not biracial. We've got to get rid of words like biracial and multiracial in the United States of America. Those words that are words that came out of the 14th century. In the late 14th century and early 15th century, people who were engaged in the Spanish Inquisition went around trying to turn everybody into Catholics. They killed those who didn't want to be Catholics. They killed a whole bunch of people, and then they realized that they killed a whole bunch of Christians. They realized at that time that you couldn't tell what a person's religion was by looking at them. So they decided they'd have to find another way to determine who probably deserved to die. And they set upon skin color. And they called lighter skinned people white because they were lighter skinned, and darker skinned people black. Now think about that. In the dictionary, white is the color of purity and goodness. Black is the color of evil and savagery. So here we are, stuck in a situation now in the 21st century in which we are still using the words white and black. I ain't white. You can see that my color of my hair is white. The color of my shirt is white. My skin is not white. We are all shades of brown. And if you don't believe that, you get into that magazine and you take these there are 4 pages like this. You cut them out and you put them, whatever this is. Anyway, see all these people, different colors? Every one of them has a color on the Pantone color wheel. So you get a copy of the Pantone color wheel, you put it on the wall, and you have people come in and put their hands against it until they find a color on the color wheel that matches the color on the back of their hand. Then you take that color and you go to the thesaurus and look up synonyms for brown. And you will find a color under synonyms for brown in Roget's thesaurus that matches the color that describes the color of their skin. So the next time you have to fill in a form that says skin color, you put that color instead of white or black. I'm not white and you aren't black. Now it makes black people, what we consider black people, really angry when I say that, because they say, I like my blackness. Well, that's nice that you like it, but you don't have it. I can tell where your hair stops and your skin begins. Because your hair, my friend, is black. Your skin is a shade of brown. My skin is a shade of brown. It does not match my hair because my hair is white. When you use 2 polar opposites to describe human beings, you set us apart and you set us against one another indefinitely. One of the ways we can stop this thing is to change the 2 words that we use to describe people. Now, if you don't have enough iron in your body to keep you healthy, you're called anemic. Then, if you don't have enough melanin in your skin to protect your cells from the damaging rays of the sun, you'd ought to be called melanemic. And if you have more melanin in your skin, which is what gives your skin its color, you should be called melanaceous. And if you have a lot of it, you should be called melanotic. None of us are white and black. We are all either melanemic, melanaceous, or melanotic. Now, people aren't going to want to do that because they don't want to look these things up. They want to go on saying white and black because we are ignorant and we want to stay that way. People oftentimes say to me, or their attitude tells me, or their behavior tells me, what they're thinking is, my mind's made up, don't confuse me with facts. And that's what keeps racism alive. Our minds are made up, we don't want to be confused with facts. And what we call history ought to be called our story instead of his story. Or maybe we could call it her story, since human beings began with females.
Absolutely. I attended Payne Theological Seminary in Wilberforce, Ohio. When I was the student there, Dr. Leah Gaskin Fitzhugh was the first woman to serve as the president of that 100 and at the time 160 something year old institution. But one of the things that she instituted was her story in the month of March. And it was a requirement before you can graduate, you had to take her story class. It was a month-long class. You had to take it. And if you didn't take it, you didn't graduate until you took it. So I agree with you 100%. 100%. Cousin Jane, as you have affectionately referred to yourself in our email exchange, I want to ask you this question. What is the biggest misconception about racism and hate in this country? And I know there's more than one.
Well, the biggest is that there's more than one race. That's the biggest misconception in the history of for the last 500 years, that there's more than one race of people on the face of the earth. There isn't. And the memory, the ignorance that we teach, we deliberately teach ignorance in the schools. What we call education is actually indoctrination. We have to teach, we have to indoctrinate every student to make them good, what we call American citizens. And one of the things they have to learn is that white males did all the inventing and discovering and all the things that were valuable, and that we have to put up with people of color, particularly black people. In the schools, we have taught that black people and people who are what we call redskins, and they were never red. You need to realize that. We called them red because they painted themselves red for special occasions, and so we call them redskins. They were red. We don't have any red population. We don't have a yellow population. We don't have a black population or a white population. We're all shades of brown. We have taught hate in the schools deliberately. And the reason we do that is because that's how we were taught. If you don't believe what I'm saying, get the book, The Color of Law, and read it. I think it's Richard Rothstein, but I'm not sure. But get the book, The Color of Law. It'll take you a minute to read it. If you don't want to read the whole thing, just read, I think it's page 220. I don't know. There are 2 pages in that book that outline it. Here it is. If churches hadn't done this and this and this, we wouldn't have racism. If governments hadn't done this and this and this, we wouldn't have racism. Racism is a learned response. We teach racism in the schools, in the public, private, and parochial schools, and in Sunday school. In Sunday school, if you read the Bible, it says in the Bible that Jesus had feet of bronze and kinky, woolly hair. That is not the way white folks want to see the person we pray to. So we have turned Jesus into someone who has pale face and has straight brown hair. This is not the way he is described in the Bible, which you read in Sunday school. We teach racism in the schools and in the churches, and we also teach hatred in those same places. We teach people to dislike those who are different from themselves. And what we need to realize is that in 30 years, white people will be a numerical minority in the United States of America. We are already and have been forever a minority worldwide. Less than 18% of the people on the face of the earth, less than 18% of the population of the earth is registered or is considered white. Now think about that. And yet we are quite convinced that we pale faces can rule the situation, can tell other people how to behave because we must know, because we look like Jesus. Jesus didn't look like this. When I tell people who are good Christians that Jesus was probably an Ethiopian Jew, and then they look up Ethiopia and see pictures of Ethiopians and realize that the Jesus that they have in their white churches, in the Methodist Church in which I was a member for years, did not look like the Jesus that hangs behind the altar. You have to realize that. One of the main differences between white people and people of other color groups is when we white folks, melanemic people, come into a new environment, we immediately adjust the environment to fit our needs. When melanaceous and melanotic people come into a new environment, they immediately adjust their needs to fit the environment, which is the reason a whole lot of people of color, particularly black people, have tried to act white for as long as they could, as hard as they could. You can't do it, and you shouldn't have to. You ought to be able, you ought to be free to look and work and walk and talk and dress the way you are, not in order to look more and worship more and learn more like melanemic people. It isn't working for melanemic people, and it won't work for any of us if we don't get over the idea of several different races. What was the question? Because I think I've forgotten the question. I'm not sure I answered it.
You're on a roll. The question was, what is the biggest misconception about racism and hate in this country? But let me just interrupt. You are doing a fantastic job. I'm watching some of the comments on various streams that I'm streaming on, and people are celebrating this conversation because you are giving us education.
But here's what you should be celebrating, and what we should have been celebrating all these years. If you aren't familiar with Anthony Browder's book, Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, for the love of God and your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren, get that book and read it this week. You will find out, just one of the things you'll find out is that 4,000 years before the birth of Jesus Christ, people in the Nile Valley, and the Nile Valley is in Egypt. Egypt is a country in Africa. 4,000 years before the birth of Jesus Christ, they were doing cataract surgery with metal instruments. That was before there was a United States of America. Do you realize that? Did you know that? And if you didn't know that, and you're a highly educated young man, if you didn't know that, you have to wonder whether you were educated or whether you were indoctrinated. And I think you were indoctrinated. I think you were taught not to study those people who look like you, because they didn't know how to run the world, but we folks that look like me did. We didn't know, we don't know, and we have done a horrible job, particularly in the last 4 years. We have to realize, and we have to celebrate the brilliance of those first modern human beings who left the area of the equator and walked to populate every landmass on the face of the earth and crossed the oceans when they had to, and knew how to do it without any modern technology. Now, for how many years in this country, at least 250 years in this country, we have regarded people of color as less than. And we called people who were on this continent when we got here, when we discovered this continent, which is such a joke. We celebrate Columbus Day. Columbus didn't discover this land. You can't discover a place where people are already living. They discovered it before we got here. And the people that he called Indians, and that we have called Indians, didn't come. He wasn't in India. He was trying to reach India. He was going to get sailing west. It didn't work. Oh, Lord. Anyway, so he gets to this land and he calls these people, he gets these Indians. They weren't Indians. Those folks came from Africa, just like all the rest of us did. Take a look at the Indian chiefs and compare them to chiefs in African tribes, and you're going to find that the similarities are obvious and cannot be explained other than by the fact that this country, this landmass, was populated originally by people from Africa. That's the way it is. Get over it, people. Start celebrating the people who were here first. Start selling the brilliance of those people who managed to make all those those fantastic voyages and trips without any help from anybody who looked like me, because there wasn't anybody here who looked like me. And the reason there wasn't is because the only reason my skin is this color is because as Africans moved farther and farther from the equator, their bodies produced less and less melanin because they were subjected to less and less sunlight. So their bodies produced less and less melanin. Their skin, their hair, and their eyes got lighter. My most recent relatives came from Ireland. Ireland is in the northern hemisphere. You need to realize that there isn't much sunlight in Ireland, and in Iowa during winter there isn't very much either. Their bodies produce less and less melanin because they needed the good things that they could get from the rays of the sun. Your body produces more vitamin D when it's exposed to sunlight. You have to realize that that was a body's adaptation to the natural environment is the reason my skin is lighter than yours. Now, you see, we don't bother to teach that because if we do, then we have to admit that white people weren't superior after all, and that maybe we have been worshiping the wrong kind of folks. Possibility?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. I'm trying to catch some of the requests. I have here on the screen for those of you who are requesting. Cousin Jane has mentioned the Now Valley Contributions to Civilization by Anthony Browder. And she has instructed me in stern tones, and I'm taking her instruction to heart, that you need to go to a bookstore and purchase this book. Just so you can see my face. And when I say this, stay off of Amazon if you can. Go to a bookstore, purchase this book from a bookstore. Amazon is putting small businesses out of business, out of commission. And so we want to keep that going. And so if you can go to a bookstore and get these books. I'm going to be listing the books that Cousin Jane has given to me. I just want you guys to see real quickly. I've been writing books titles down as she gives them. I know it looks messy and crazy, but I'm trying to get it as she's giving it. Cousin Jane knows how my notes look when I was in school, so it works for me. But you've already mentioned this question, and so I want to guide us into that conversation. What is the difference between education and indoctrination in schools regarding race in America? You've already touched on it, but I want you to go a little deeper.
Well, here's one of the things. We teach children in schools how to be good Americans. And we use the word America as if America is only the 48 contiguous states, Hawaii, Alaska, and the islands off the southeastern coast of the United States. That is not all that constitutes America. You need to realize that America is everything from the northernmost point of Canada. See this ugly map? America is everything from the northernmost point of Canada. This is hard to do when you're going backwards. To the southernmost point of South America. Here's where Americans live, in all this area. Look here. This is the map that you shouldn't be using, and this is something you shouldn't be using when it's in reverse for you. People, America is everything from the northernmost point of Canada to the southernmost point of South America. North America, Central America, and South America are all part of America. The important title of our country is the United States of America. And the important word in that title is the word united. Our founding fathers united these states, and there were 48 of them at that time, and there weren't 50 at that time. And by the time Joe Biden is no longer president, there will be 52 states in the United States of America. We've got to stop calling this place America and start calling it the United States of America, because that's what we are. Mr. Trump built a wall along the southern border of what he calls America to keep those Americans out. Folks, those people in Central and South America are Americans. So you're trying to keep out the very people who are our cousins.
That's right.
They aren't citizens of the United States of America. And another reason he built that wall, he said we have to keep those dark-skinned, brown-skinned people out of this country because brown-skinned people reproduce too rapidly. Now think about that. He said that just before he started to close Planned Parenthood clinics. Most of the Planned Parenthood clinics in this country have been closed because he and his associates were quite convinced that the only thing that happens in Planned Parenthood clinics is abortions. Planned Parenthood clinics furnish many services for women, most of which, the vast majority of which, are not abortions. You need to realize that women got abortions before there were Planned Parenthood clinics. And they will be getting them after the Planned Parenthood clinics are closed, because some women decide that they have the right to decide whether or not to let the country use their bodies to produce the number of children that are born in this country every year. You need to realize that one of the reasons this happened, this wall business, is because a man named Ben Wattenberg, who's a member of the American Institute, anyway, a Republican, rigid Republican think tank, American Enterprise Institute, wrote a book called The Birth Dearth, Birthdearth. Now, don't read the book that he wrote after 1987. But if you can get the book that he wrote during 1987 called The Birth Dearth, get it and read it. And he was an advisor to presidents of the United States. And in the first paragraph of that book, he said, the number one problem confronting the United States today is that there aren't enough white babies being born in this country today. If we do not change this situation, white people will no longer be a numerical majority in the United States of America, and this will no longer be a white man's land. Now, I read that paragraph and I thought, oh my God, he didn't say that. He doesn't mean that. I'll finish the book. So I read it. And in the next paragraph, he says, there are three things we can do to take care of this situation. Number one, we could pay women to have babies, as they have been doing in Western European nations for years. Then he says, unfortunately, and these are his words, not mine. He says, unfortunately, we would have to pay women of all colors to have babies, so we don't want to do that. He says, the second thing we could do is increase the number of legal immigrants allowed into this country every year. Once again, he says, unfortunately, the vast majority of people wanting to come to this country today are people of color, so we don't want to do that. He said the third thing we could do is remember that 60% of the fetuses that are aborted every year in this country are white. If we could keep that 60% alive, that would solve our birth dearth. Now, people, as a result of his advice, people like Ronald Reagan and W changed the laws so that we'll get rid of abortion, we'll close Planned Parenthood clinics, and we'll change the immigration laws so that keep those people out of this country. Folks, those people were here before we people got here. You need to realize that. And you need to realize that having people of those colors in this country enriches this country. It made it what it was in the beginning, and it has enriched this country today. And the next time somebody says to you, the White House, you need to say, wait a minute. The White House was built on the backs of black slaves. You know that they did the work. And when Ronald Reagan stood there and said, we're going to go back to the good old days. We're going to reconstruct this shining city on a hill. That shining city on a hill called Washington, D.C. was built on the bones of black and brown people. Make no mistake about that. It's time to change the name of the White House and change it to what it is, the president's residence.
Amen.
It's time to stop. Amen. It's time to stop calling that the White House. It sends the wrong message. I remember when Richard Nixon said to a group of reporters, I'm trying to save the White House for you white people. Make no mistake about that. That's what the new election laws all over the United States are all about. Maintaining white numerical majority and superiority in this country, and it can't be done. It's impossible. We are working on doing something that has to be stopped. It's inevitable that white people will remain a minority in the United States of America, just as they are all over the face of the earth.
Absolutely. Cousin Jane, we have a question coming in from one of our viewers that's watching on YouTube, and she wants to ask, and I want to try to get this in. She wants to ask, can you speak on the Tulsa massacre events held today and the bills to be passed for reparations in Congress? And I want to add that one of my classmates from the doctoral program at United Theological Seminary in Trotwood, Ohio, the Reverend Dr. Robert Turner, pastors one of our churches, Mount Vernon African Methodist Episcopal Church in Tulsa, which was burned down to the basement of the church during the Tulsa race riots. He has been doing a marvelous job in bringing attention to forgotten history in this country. And so shout out to my friend and classmate, the Reverend Dr. Robert Richard Allen Turner.
I think that I think the Tulsa massacre could happen again today. I think it is happening in small ways every day in the United States of America, but we're doing it in different ways. A group of registered nurses called me from Los Angeles, called me 2 years ago and said, will you come and speak to our registered nurses? We all work in delivery rooms and we want you to talk to us. I said, well, I was in a delivery room 4 times in 5 years, but I don't know anything about medicine. I think I'm the wrong person you need. They said, we don't want to talk about medicine. We want to talk about racism because we have all worked in delivery rooms and we know that Black and brown women don't get the same treatment in delivery rooms that white women do. We want to become midwives so that we will furnish good treatment for people, for women and children of every color group when they come into the delivery room. Black and brown women have been afraid to go to the delivery room because they aren't sure of how they're going to be treated there. And these registered nurses, when I went to these registered nurses, when I went to talk to them, probably 50 women in that room of different groups. And every one of them indicated that they had seen a different level of care for women of color compared to what white women got in delivery rooms. We didn't stop with Tulsa. We're still doing that all over the United States of America, but we're doing it one person at a time, 2 people at a time, a woman and a baby. And you need to be aware of that.
My God.
You see, I think, well, my God is who we're depending on to stop it. You cannot depend on God to do this. God put us here. He gave us a brain. He gave us the ability to think. He gave us the morals, and we have ignored them, and we are still ignoring them. This nation is less moral now than it has been at any time in my lifetime. And it went downhill dreadfully after the election of Mr. Trump. You need to realize that. Morality is no longer something that is admired greatly in the United States of America. The best
I agree 100%.
Well, hey, I've been in Saudi Arabia 3 times. My daughter married a Saudi Arabian. In Saudi Arabia, the most respected man in the village is the man who can lie the best and get away with it.
Wow.
And in
Wow.
this country, hey, I didn't learn these things in Riceville, Iowa. I didn't learn these things going to school. I learned these things by living in a land in which I have the right to think, I have the right to read, I have the right to stop this self-imposed ignorance. And that's what we're all suffering from, self-imposed ignorance. Just because you learn this crap, K through 12, doesn't mean you have to believe it and doesn't mean you have to teach it to your children. Your children and your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren have the right to learn the truth because they're going to be here in 30, 40, 50, 60 years when the ozone layer has gotten such a large hole in it that more and more sunlight is allowed to enter our environment. And more people with skin the color of mine are dying of melanoma, which is a skin cancer that you get from overexposure to the sun. Your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, their very lives are going to depend on you knowing that having more melanin in your skin is not a bad thing. It's a very good thing. It could be what keeps you alive. You pale-faced people need to listen to this. Unless you plan on covering yourself with all kinds of sun protection lotions from now until the day you die, you're going to die soon because you have been taught the lie of the rightness of whiteness, and it is a lie. You are not superior, you are not supreme, and you are not members of a different race. You are all, and if you don't believe me, just have your DNA traced back as far as you can trace it. If every person in the world would trace their DNA back as far as they could, they would find that a percentage of their DNA came from a country in Africa. Get over it, people. Get on with it, people. Start seeing everyone around you as one of your 30th to 50th cousins, because they are. We all have the same ancestors back there 300,000 to 500,000 years ago. Get over it. There's only one race of people on the face of the earth, and if you don't believe that, then you get the book Sapiens, S-A-P-I-E-N-S, Sapiens. It's written by a man whose last name, I believe, is Harari, H-A-R-A-R-I. Get the book Sapiens. When you're reading through that book, you'll burst out laughing because some of the things he writes make this whole thing sound so totally ridiculous. get the book Sapiens and read it. I should warn you. For some reason, they made it out of the heaviest paper I have ever seen in my life. The book weighs about 4 pounds. I haven't weighed it. I should go and get it and weigh it just so I'll know for sure. But the information in it is really heavy, and you ought to know it. We ought to be teaching that to our children. Your very future, your children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren's future depends on having more melanin in their skin because of the damage that we've done with our industrialization and the fact that we have ruined the climate and we've ruined the ozone layer. Think about that.
Listen here. Listen.
Listen to here. That's going to make all these laws about miscegenation just totally ridiculous. We wrote laws, and in some states, they still have laws to keep people of different races from reproducing together. There's only one race. So those laws are as ridiculous as all the rest of this. We're all members of the same race. You can't reproduce with a member of another race unless you are dating and sleeping with a Martian. And I don't think many people are. But you see, the whole thing is totally ridiculous. A country that prides itself on the amount of money that it spends on education. Oh dear, this woman, Jeanine Baumgardner, saw me school a young African. Oh, mercy. He didn't come to my house so that I could re-educate him. He was quite taken aback when he realized that I was 60 years old when he was born. You see, I don't have to listen to someone who's 20 years old telling me I don't know what I'm talking about. If I were talking about computers, I wouldn't know what I'm talking about. If I'm talking about racism, I know what I'm talking about because I've been studying
100%
it for 60 years. Yeah, for 60 years I've been studying this because it is the worst proof of our lack of education that we have in this country is the way we still feel about people of different color groups. It is proof positive that we don't know what we're doing and that we don't believe what we preach in Christian churches. We don't believe what we read in the Bible. We believe that we have the right to act white. And if you want to be accepted by us, you too had better learn to act white. At the same time that we are denying all the fantastic things we got from Egyptians. If you knew how many wonderful things we got from Egyptians, you'd have to say to yourselves, we got all those things from Africans. Yes, we did, because Egypt is a country in Africa. But in school, we talk about Egypt as if it were in the Middle East. It isn't, it's in Africa. But we don't want to admit that all those wonderful things came to us from Africans, so we just call them Middle Easterners. Africa is not in the Middle East, people. It's on the continent of Africa.
You know, I want to pause there for a quick second, and I want to highlight the book that I had placed up here just a minute ago. I had the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Walter Melton Jr. and Joel A. Freeman, Reverend Joel A. Freeman, PhD. They are the authors of Black History 365, an inclusive account of American history. They was gracious enough to send me a copy of the book. The book is $175. It is a huge book, and I don't have it in front of me right now. But they also sent me what you would call an electronic version of the book. And so I've been making my way through that book. I just finished reading all of the preface and reading all the information that went into building this amazing book. And I got through chapter 1 just last night. And as I was reading through this, tears came to my eyes because none of this stuff was taught to me in school. None of the ingenuity, the smarts, the brilliance, the technology that Africans built, and how the country was ravaged with racism and whiteness, and how everything you have just said has been true. And so I cannot thank you enough, Cousin Jane, for taking time out of your schedule, being with me. I have just 2 more questions that I want to ask you, and I want to keep this under the time limit that I promised you. Whose responsibility is it to fix racism in America?
Yours and mine. That's up to us. That's up to individuals. It's up to us to elect people who are not going to change the election laws in order to make more Republicans get elected. It's up to us to tell people when they make racist remarks. It's up to us to insist that this map be placed in the schools, which is the Peters projection map, in which What are we talking about here? This little country up here is that size instead of the size it is. Greenland is this size instead of the size it is on the regular map. It's up to us to put this map in the schools so that children see a map in which Africa is 18 times the size of Greenland and South America is 14 times the size of Greenland. It's time for kids to see a map that shows this with the map that has the equator halfway between the North Pole and the South Pole instead of 2/3 of the way down the map. It's time for us to get this map or one like it in the schools in the United States of America, and that we get the Mercator projection map out of the schools. And you need to realize that on the bottom of the Mercator map, there is a legend. It says, Mercator's map, upon which true bearings of courses can be measured directly, has been used by nearly all navigators since about 1600. Now, Mercator was commissioned by the Pope to make a map that showed the spread of Christianity in the first place, in the year 1600. It goes on, blah, 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 blah. The last sentence says, South America is actually 9 times larger than Greenland. How dare we continue to use a map that says that on the legend at the bottom of the map, but which we never evidently read to the children. And evidently the teachers don't bother with it. We need to change what we teach in the schools, and the first thing we have to do if we're going to destroy racism is to change what we teach in social studies, because much of what we teach in social studies in schools in the United States of America is anti-social studies. It is anti-social to lie to students in the classroom on a daily basis, and that's what we do. And we do it with audiovisual materials, and we expect them to react positively to this kind of nonsense. We have to put a stop to it. We could change this if we chose to. Every person who has children going to school, or every person who doesn't have children going to school, every person who cares about the future of the United States of America needs to get involved in the education in this country. And the first thing you have to do is get rid of the idea of the greatness of charter schools. Charter schools are put in place to increase the wealthy in this country and increase their wealth and increase the level of racism. I'm reading a book right now, and I don't remember the name of it, but you've got to read it. It's Rich as a result of racism in the United States. It's something like that title. You need to get that book and read it. It is terrifying when you just read the chapter on education, which talks about what charter schools are doing to education in this country. You think that the kind of stuff that goes on in the public, private, and parochial schools, public schools, is dangerous. Wait until you read what goes on in charter schools. You see, the government can't tell teachers in charter schools how to teach. They can tell teachers in public, private, and parochial schools how to teach. They can't in the charter schools. Charter schools are financed by individuals in the private sector. You have to realize that we're making a huge mistake putting in what they're trying to do is do away with public education. Read a book, The Color Law, and then read this book about racism and riches in the United States, and then realize that every single human being living in the United States of America is responsible for putting a stop to what is happening with education in this country. We have to stop it, and we have to stop it now. Every single person has the power to make a difference. And now you're saying, well, one person can't make a difference. Donald Trump was only one person, and he has made a tremendous negative difference in this country. You need to understand that, and you need to realize that the Proud Boys and QAnon and the Oath Keepers and the KKK are about racism, and they are about shutting down any school or any person who stands up and says what we're doing is wrong. Racism is wrong. It is something you learn. Anything you learn, you can unlearn it. It's time to stop teaching it. It's time to stop allowing it to be taught. And it's time to stop practicing it. It's time to realize that you weren't born a racist. There is no gene for racism. You have to be carefully taught to be a racist. And that's what we do in the schools and the Sunday schools in this country. And we need to put a stop to it. First, you have to recognize it. Then you have to realize that there's something you can do. And now you're thinking, well, you brought us a lot of problems. You didn't bring us any solutions. Oh, yes, I did. Go to my website, download the printed learning materials. The first set is a set of typical statements the white folks that make that think they aren't racist. I suspect that every person who's watching this, who is a person of color, particularly a person that we call black, has had somebody say to them, when I see you, I don't see you black. If you have had that said to you, just raise your hand or just raise this finger. I don't care. But just say to yourself, I've heard that. If you've heard that, you need to realize that the person who said that to you was lying to you, to your face. If they didn't see you black, they would say black. They would say, when I see you, I don't see you yellow or green or orange or pink. But that's not what they say. They say black because it's all right for them to say to you that in order for you to be acceptable to them, you have to say thank you when they say that they don't see you, they don't see the color of your skin. People, your skin is the largest organ on your body, inch by inch. Yes, the skin is the largest inch by inch organ on your body. And anybody who says they don't see it is a fool and a liar. And you're a fool if you let them get away with it. You need to say, no, we're not, that you're not going to be allowed to say to me. Because that is a deliberate attempt to put you in your place. Now, first you go through the typical statements, and you check those that you would agree with, and then you go to the clarifications of those statements. When the people say other ethnic groups had to struggle, why is it so different for the blacks? That shows a deep ignorance of the special deprivation suffered by black people at the hands of whites. My people came from Ireland. They didn't have to suffer the same things that the black people who came to this country the same year my people came from Ireland did. My people from Ireland didn't have to do the same things, didn't have to be treated the same way. All they had to do was act white. Get that set of materials and then go to the next page, which is Commitments to Combat Racism. 18 things that every person in the United States can do in their own environment to deal with their own racism. Racism is an individual problem. Now some of you are saying, it's a societal problem. Societies are racist. No, societies are made up of individuals. And if enough individuals in a community change their racist behavior, you will change the attitude and the behavior in a welcoming situation for people of color in that community. Every person needs to realize what they can do. And one of the things you can do is refuse to buy anything from the companies that are running this show and that have formed monopolies so that little businesses, mom and pop businesses, are going out of business on a daily basis in this country because of companies like Walmart and Amazon. And you need to read that book about riches and race and get it into your heads that you are being manipulated by the people who have the money in this country, who can tell you what you are going to be allowed to learn and where you are going to be allowed to live and where you are going to be allowed to go to school. This is getting worse instead of better. Now, some of you are thinking, boy, she's really depressing me. Well, you can choose to be depressed, or you can say to yourself, no, knowledge is the answer to this, and I'm going to get smart. I'm going to read every book she said to, and I'm going to get her bibliography on that set of printed learning materials, and I'm going to read every book on that bibliography that's listed under race, so that you will know exactly what it is. You'll know why your kids are afraid to go outside, why you are afraid as a black mother, if you are a black mother. You are concerned about what's going to happen to your son when he leaves your house in the morning because you aren't sure how he's going to come back or if he's going to come back at night because of the way he is seen by the local members of the police department.
Cousin Jane, I want to get, what is it? I want to get that book you mentioned on race and riches. What was the name of that book?
I'll have to go in the room and get it. Do you have a minute?
Yes, ma'am.
If you have a minute, well, just a minute. I don't run fast enough, you understand. I stopped running a long time ago. But I can walk in here and get this book, and the name of this is Good thing I live in a small house. Here it is. Rich, thanks to racism.
Yes,
how
ma'am.
The ultra wealthy, yes, how the ultra wealthy profit from racial injustice. Jim Freeman, get this book and read it. Just the chapter on education will break your heart when you realize how we are being manipulated on a daily basis by the wealthy in this company who got wealthy because of racism. You need to realize, if you haven't read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, you get that book and read it. because she talked about what we have done with the criminal justice system in this country. It's criminal. It's not just. The word criminal justice is an oxymoron statement. We don't have criminal justice in this country. What we have for justice is criminal. If you haven't read that book, you need to get it and read it.
Let you. This is such a blessing because that's one of the books that was required reading when I was getting my master's of divinity degree at Payne Theological Seminary. Shout out to Payne Theological Seminary for making us read uncomfortable material so that we can be informed pastors and preachers. One of my classmates did his thesis and his dissertation on that book at the New Jim Crow, and currently pastors in New Jersey and does that work in the community. Let me just say, you have been an extraordinary blessing. I have your website listed here. Please go to JaneElliott.com. Get those resources under racism on her website. Please educate yourself. Before I ask my final question, I want to share this video and get your response as to where you were and what was going on in that room. This is a video that you shared about racism, asking the crowd, would you want to be treated as Black people? Take a listen.
I want every white person in this room who would be happy to be treated as this society in general treats our citizens, our Black citizens. If you, as a white person, would be happy to receive the same treatment that our Black citizens do in this society, please stand. You didn't understand the directions. If you white folks want to be treated the way Blacks are in this society, stand. Nobody's standing here. That says very plainly that you know what's happening. You know you don't want it for you. I want to know why you're so willing to accept it or to allow it to happen for others.
Cousin Jane, where were you when you taught that lesson?
I was in Southern California in a college, and I can't remember the name of it. But now, when I ask people now, when I get into a college situation or any place else, I say, well, every person in this room who considers himself or herself a member of the white race, please stand. All those folks jump up, just tickled to death. Now will the Black race stand? They jump up. Now the brown, now the yellow, now the red. And now they get them all upon their feet. I say, now, will every person in this room who considers himself or herself a member of the human race, please sit down. And they all gasp and then sit down, and then they start to talk to each other. And I say, there it is, people. You're all members of the same race. I want this nonsense stopped. And you college students won't leave here really educated unless you prove that you have decided to put a stop to it, because the future of this nation, and therefore the future of the world, depends on people of your age making these changes. Do it now.
Absolutely. I want to ask this question. I ask every one of my guests this same question, and I want to ask you the same one because I just love your mind and I love your witness, and I'm so very thankful. I want to get this out the way now. I'm so very thankful that you responded to my email. I prayed about who I should have, and I was watching a video of you, and I said to myself, she may not respond, I may not get an answer, but hey, I'm going to email Jane Elliott. I'm going to ask her, would she be willing to talk on my show and to help me to articulate this conversation about race, religion, and reason. And you have done exactly that. You have blessed me. And when you signed your email the other day, Cousin Jane, I shared it with many of my colleagues and friends. That blessed me in a tremendous way, not because of your celebrity, but because of the sincerity of your honesty to end racism and to teach that we're all related, that God did not create many races. God created one race of people, and that we ought to strive both in society, culture, education, and the church to end racism, to put an end to it. And so I want to say thank you, but I want to ask you this question. How would you define unholy silence?
Anybody who doesn't speak up when they hear something racist being said or see something racist being done, that's unholy silence. God created the human race. Human beings created racism. Anything you create, you can destroy. We can destroy racism in 2 generations if we decided to. I destroyed it in my 3rd graders starting in 1968. They are different from their peers to this day. And they've done studies with those kids that proved education could make the difference. Unholy silence is our willingness to go along to get along, to be sure that we don't put our head above the parapet because somebody's going to shoot it off. Take the chance. Take the chance. I would rather, there are things worse than being dead. And one of those things is living a meaningless life. And if you go through life and you have made a difference, a positive difference in the level of racism in this country, you have made a big mistake. You have lost your opportunity to be what you want to be like, or I think most people want to be like that heavenly spirit that they talk about. If you haven't made a difference in the level of racism in this country, you haven't succeeded as a human being. We weren't put here to make everybody look like us. We were put here to appreciate all of God's children, not just the ones who look like me.
100%. 100%. Cousin Jane, I want to say thank you so very much for taking time out of your schedule to be with me today. Thank you for this educational class. I have been blessed. I want you to know that my shopping cart is going to be pretty hefty. It's going to be pretty hefty. And you know what?
Did you learn anything? Did you learn anything?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
All right. That's all you have to say. You don't have to say thank you to me. That's my job. If you learned something today, it's because you decided to. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have heard what I said, but haven't decided to learn from it. Somebody who decides to learn from it has made my day. If you decided to learn something today, thank you very much. That's all the payment I need for this day.
100%. And I just having been raised in the South by my grandmother, whom I'm blessed to see and to fellowship with. Shout out to my grandmama, Ida Mae Davis. She's at her house enjoying fried fish and whatever else my dad is cooking for her today. They're cooking on the grill for her today for Memorial Day. And so she has her children. My grandmother's 82 years old, and she has pushed me all my life to be the best preacher I can be, to educate myself. And so this has been a conversation that I can appreciate because she never talked about racism. She said God made us all. And that is the best theology I think anyone can teach, is that God made us all. And using critical thinking, you can dissect what that means. You can deduce what that means. God made us all. And so there shouldn't be any separation to who we are if we say we are God's children, because God made us all. And so I want to thank you again. I really appreciate your time. And I look forward to us communicating via email. And if you have more time in the future and you feel like coming back on the show, I'll email and call and have you on so we can continue this very vital conversation.
And maybe if you have me on in 5 years, things will have turned around.
Yes, ma'am. That is my prayer. Can you imagine?
Imagine that. Can you imagine that? Come on, people. If we could get to the moon in 3 years after JFK became president, we could solve the problem of racism. If we can get to the moon, but we can't respond to our neighbor, there's something wrong with us. Something wrong with us, not with the system, but with us. We need to change us, and we can change the world. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so very much. This has been a wonderful day. I have been blessed to have a conversation with the incomparable Jane Elliott. I invite you to watch this show, share this show with your friends. Please order the books that she has listed. I'm going to, on my personal Facebook page, list all of the books so that you can get these books. Please educate yourself, and please make sure that you're listening to what she has taught us, that we have a responsibility to put an end to racism. As always, I try to offer a final thought, and I share this thought from an article that I wrote for the Christian Recorder on June 3rd, 2020 of last year. The continuation of complicit silence delineates the objectified anger and frustration stemming from other religious groups content with sharing the burden of social justice. Silence is not spiritual, neither is it reflective of the mind of God. The urgency of choice beckons the question of who can we trust? Racism and hate are not a result of learned culture. It is a result of learned behavior. Therefore, in the face of racial disharmony, real Christians cannot abdicate the responsibility of choosing to do what is right. Confront racism on all levels. The burden of choice must be personal, emotional, subjective, and communal. To remain silent is both a tragedy and a sin, and to be an African American Christian, we needn't fear the mountain of racism. We simply must say, as Joshua, Lord, give me this mountain and take his head. This has been Conversation with Faith Leaders. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I invite you to tune in next time, same place, same time. God bless. Stay safe. May the Lord keep you.
Why do we hate?
We hate because we're taught to hate. We hate because we're ignorant. We're the product of ignorant people who have been taught an ignorant thing, which is that there are 4 or 5 different races. There are not 4 or 5 different races. There's only one race on the face of the earth, and we're all members of that race, the human race. But we have separated people into races so that some of us can see ourselves as superior to the others. We thought it would work, I guess. It hasn't worked. It has been bad for everyone. But it's time to get over this business. There is no gene for racism. There's no gene for bigotry. You're not born a bigot. You have to learn to be a bigot. Anything you learn, you can unlearn. It's time to unlearn our bigotry. It's time to get over this thing, and we best get over it pretty soon. I'm an educator, and it's my business as an educator to lead people out of ignorance. The ignorance of thinking that you're better or worse than someone else because of the amount of a pigment in your skin. Pigmentation in your skin has nothing to do with intelligence or with your worth as a human being. It's time to get over that.